was an Oz without the Wicked Witch. Sullivan and Ulster counties, located about 75 miles from New York City, were for over 50 years the largest resort area in the United States. More than 500 hotels, countless bungalow colonies, and rooming houses were a mecca for millions of tourists. A time when a vacation meant a trip to the mountains. From the 1930s to the late 60s, the Catskill hotels were the setting for the most important, fascinating era in American humor. During that time, comedy went to school. And what a graduating class.
You see, in those days, comics had some place to be bad.
When you go to the mountains, that's where you learn.
You become more familiar with yourself. You know you can share things that you were scared to share with an audience.
They didn't tell you to go away because you had a dream of being a comedian.
It was a laboratory. It was marvelous.
If they're not laughing, you better close it down quick.
The Catskills was the breeding ground for the stand-up comic.
The Catskills basically was a school for comedy.
They asked me to do a show in the hospital in front of a patient, and I was singing, dancing, telling my best stories. So on the way out, I said to him, "I hope you get better." He said to me, "You too."
Make 'em laugh, make 'em laugh. Don't you know everyone wants to laugh? Your dad said, be an actor, my son, but be a comical one. They'll be stacked in line for those old honky-tonk monkey shines. Now you could study Shakespeare and be quite elite, and you can charm the critics and have nothing to eat. Just sip on a banana, feel the world at your feet. Make 'em laugh, make 'em laugh, make 'em laugh. Make 'em laugh, make 'em laugh. Don't you know everyone wants to laugh? Your grandpa said go out and tell him a joke, but give it plenty of hope. Make 'em roar, make 'em scream. Take a fall by the wall, split a seam. You start off by pretending you're a dancer with grace. You wait till they're jiggling all over the place, and then you get a great big custard pie in the face. Make 'em laugh, make 'em laugh, make 'em laugh. Make 'em laugh, make 'em laugh, make 'em laugh.
This stage doesn't look like much now, or this nightclub, for that matter. Yet in hundreds of places like this, stages, nightclubs, cabarets, venues large and small, elegant and rudimentary, there once was magic.
Boy, what a crowd, what a crowd. Now, last week I told my wife, a man is like wine, he gets better with age. She locked me in a cellar.
Take my wife, please. I take my wife everywhere, but she finds her way home.
We can be this disgusting. We can go in front of a synagogue and sing about pork.
Comedy headliners performed, and future comedy greats got their start. A time when audiences in the thousands would attend a single show and luxuriate in the richness of these very surroundings. Hard to believe now, but it's true. I'm Robert Klein, and I was there. When I was a busboy, I watched the shows from the back of the club. My first opportunity to see comedians live, their mastery, making people happy, all because of a skillful comedian. It resounded like a Chinese gong over my head. Wouldn't that be a wonderful life?
On the Saturday night show, these mountain comics absolutely fascinated me. They'd come out, hey, you know, hey, very staccato. Hey, you two bald-headed men, you put your heads together, you make an ass of yourself, but seriously. Insult and, you know, say, hey, what are you doing now? Oh, the clarinet gets stuck in their mouth. Then he'd go into this English jokes with Yiddish punchlines. They did this sometimes, and it drove me crazy. I don't understand Yiddish. And the guy has me hooked on a good story, and I'm trailing along. You know what happened last night? I went to my wife. I said, let's make love. She said, I can't. Went to the doctor, got a pill. You know what happened?
The Catskill comedians were audience tested in a way no other comedians were. And they were able to succeed because they knew what was funny. They had tried it out.
The audiences were very picky. You couldn't do anything near off color. And making money, $10 a week.
Working in front of tough audiences, they could refine their timing, check out the competition, lay an egg, if you will, and not be banished forever. Besides, they had a bed meals and even made a few bucks. They watched, listened, and learned.
It was a very natural thing to develop your craft over there because you had to do a show for some form of entertainment almost every day. If you come to somebody's house and tell them a joke that you told them yesterday, that's the best way to get thrown out of a house. And you would have gotten thrown out of the Catskills if you were telling the same joke. So you had to be improvisational, creative, and develop all kinds of tricks for comedy, for entertainment. The trick of comedy is to entertain people, not to entertain one sick Jew like me with a neurotic problem.
In essence, the Catskill Hotels created a comedy boot camp for American humor. Basic training for a generation plus of our most gifted comics who tickled countless funny bones and profoundly influenced popular entertainment worldwide.
The comedians that have graced our stages were an experience. Guys like this, I don't think you'll ever see come around again. I mean, they were just marvelous entertainers. Guys like Red Buttons and Jan Murray, Dick Shawn.
Jewish parents feed their children certain kinds of food that keep them from moving quick. Matzah balls.
Jackie Mason.
As a matter of fact, I was so ugly as a baby that my mother used to diaper my face.
Alan King.
My wife takes 40 minutes to put lipstick on. There's a reason. She's got a big mouth.
Where we had the cream of the crop of the resorts, of the one-nighters, of the club dates. People like Toady Fields.
Do you know they found out about Jewish food? It goes in, and it never comes out again.
Norm Crosby, Jack Carter, Joan Rivers.
When I was single, I was the last girl in Larchmont, New York to get married. My mother had to sign up last girl before freeway. Now, you have no idea.
We also had Shecky Green, Myron Cohen.
About a Texan who went to Israel on a visit, said to his Israeli host, "You get to my home in Dallas, I'm gonna take it to my ranch." He said, "I can't tell you how big my ranch is. But when I get into my car at 7 o'clock in the morning, I drive for 10 hours and I still ain't reached the end of my property." The Israeli says, "You know, once I had a car like this myself."
Named Rodney Dangerfield.
Oh, yeah, my wife can't do nothing right. I mean, she can't cook at all. My backyard, the flies chipped in to fix the screen door.
I started to pick up some of the young comics who were just developing and on the rise. Gabe Kaplan, David Brenner, Bill Maher, Robert Klein.
The best course I ever took was abnormal psychology. I love that course. No more theoretical bullshit. There they are in front of you, sick people.
Jerry Seinfeld told me that he used to sneak into the back of the nightclub, and, you know, this was part of what convinced him to be in show business.
What is that age that old people reach where they decide when they back out of a driveway, they're not looking anymore? You know how they do that? They just go, "Well, I'm old, and I'm coming back."
Billy Crystal worked here and enjoyed it.
Odd casting in movies, like Edward G. Robinson in The Ten Commandments. Good actor, wrong role. Where's your Messiah now? Hey, Pharaoh, where's your Moses now, say? Yeah, let my people go now.
This is why I love the Catskills!
They weren't household names. I put them in on a Saturday night in the summertime, and my guests were saying, who? You know, who is this guy?
Catskills were the American Idol of that period. You talk about a proving ground. That was the place where so many broke in.
It's an antique gold heirloom
That's really spectacular. My grandfather, on his deathbed, sold me this watch.
If Ed Sullivan was watching, if Steve Allen was watching, he would get their TV exposure and take it from there.
As we move deeper into the 21st century, it's apparent that some of the most familiar figures in American culture are its comedians. How did it come to be that a nation that started the 20th century laughing at jokes of folk humorists such as Will Rogers end up captivated by Robin Williams, go from Jack Benny to Woody Allen, and conclude the 20th century captivated by the urbane parodies of Seinfeld? Perhaps it goes as far back to the birth of Isaac, son of Abraham and Sarah, history's firstborn Jew. Isaac means he shall laugh. This is the name, according to Genesis, that God told Abraham and Sarah to give him. It seems, according to the Old Testament, that they laughed when he was born.
Hey, if you had your first kid when you were 100 and your wife was 90, you'd have to laugh too.
The Jews are the people that couldn't get out of this sandy desert. And they had an idea to make food out of this biscuit-like material that sat on a rock for 8 hours, and it got baked, and they ate that while it crumbled worse than crackers. And that's dinner. We're eating matzah. Your matzah been a beautiful baby. And we think it's funny.
God and the Jews.
George Burns even played God, a match made in heaven. When Burns was 99, the London Palladium Theatre offered him a one-year contract. Burns refused, insisting on a multi-year deal. After all, he said, I'm only 99. This raises a crucial question. What comes after chutzpah?
You had to have a sense of humor, for Christ's sakes. That's what got the Jews through it. It was our salvation, and it was our understanding that we'll get through it if we're not too terribly serious.
For now begins the Inquisition.
Oi, oi, Gewalt. The Inquisition. What a show. The Inquisition. Here we go.
Jews, in order to survive over the millennia, seem to develop a survival mechanism. Jokes in the genes, if you will.
Oh, boy. The Inquisition. What joy. The Inquisition. Oi, oi.
The virtue of the Jewish people in comedy is that they could always find the joke. The people are up in front of the German firing squad, and one of the guys says, you know, long live the Jewish homeland. And the other guy says, shh, don't make trouble.
They had to be so alert to what was going on, because without that alertness, they would have been dead. And that kind of psychological skill was crucial to being able to be a good comedian.
To know that you're going through something, and it's hard, and it's rough, but you make a joke.
See Hitler on ice.
If you can laugh at your situation, wow, what a gift.
The target of the Jewish humorist is to puncture the pompous and bring down the high and mighty to a common human level.
And now we come to a young man who recently played a command performance for the Queen of England. And how many boys from Brooklyn can say that? Alan King.
Alan King had a command performance before the Queen. And Queen Elizabeth, according to protocol, said, "Hello, Mr. King." And he replied, "Hello, Mrs. Queen," which, of course, is typically Jewish humor. We're all in the same boat. We're all going to die. We might as well laugh till we get to that terminal point.
Most of the Western philosophers were Jewish. And we trace Moses, who invented the law.
These 15. Wait. 10 commandments for all to obey.
Which nobody obeyed. Then Jesus, who invented forgiveness. And nobody wanted to forgive. And then Marx, who invented sharing the spoils, which nobody wanted to do. And then Freud, who said, if you can't stop stealing and you can't forgive and you can't share, do you think you can understand other people? And nobody wanted to do that. Then finally, Einstein arrives, the fifth Jewish philosopher, and he says, Dear President Roosevelt, I have a bomb which can destroy everything we've built up until now. And this caught on.
Jewish humor comes from the shtetl. And its ability to hold two opposite ideas at the same time, like wealth and poverty, pain and pleasure.
Would it spoil some vast eternal plan? Witness Tevye as an example, raising his fist at God, bemoaning his fate. He can't get too mad, of course. It's God. And it's a musical. As Jews immigrated to the New World, that fist, with humor, mind you, became gloved in gags, railing not against God or secular matters, but against alienation, societal demands, expectations.
Jews flooded into the Lower East Side. The concentration of Jewish population was more dense than Calcutta is today. There were 500 people per acre at one point in the early 20th century. There was a sense of doom and gloom in the crowded tenements.
Doom and gloom, of course, but what a fabulous new field for complaints, doubts, and guilt. Triple oy vey. The waves of immigrants still learning how to be free collided with new forms of prejudice. They reacted with humor, woven into a chain-link fabric of survival armor.
That a brand new kind of comedy was born, one that required a particularly Jewish experience, but in a particular American setting.
The primary form of entertainment for the newly arrived Jewish immigrants was Yiddish theater. It provided the familiarity of their native language, audience camaraderie, stories, and characters that many had embraced as young men and women.
Most of it we did on 2nd Avenue. That was our Broadway. I joined the chorus in the Yiddish theater, and I learned how to sing and I learned how to dance.
Miss Esther Saltzman.
The audience loved it. It was wonderful. I worked with the biggest stars of the Yiddish theater.
Some of the more notable performers were booked on the many vaudeville circuits. Comedians, singers, novelty acts, dancers. These hardy performers crisscrossed the country. From the turn of the century until the early 1930s, vaudeville flourished.
Somehow or other, my father always found it in enough pennies to take me to vaudeville shows, and he loved vaudeville. He was a bit of a comic himself. But we'd get there for the show, and
How do you do, ladies and gentlemen?
he'd leap over the seats like a jackrabbit to get into the first 2 rows. But if the guy on stage wasn't funny, he'd say, he's a faker. And that never left me. And all I remember is that whenever I go on stage, and I decided to go into this crazy world, one thing that keeps running in my mind is my father saying about this guy, he's a faker. So that influenced me in a lot of ways. It also put me into therapy.
Vaudeville comics used exaggerated accents, stereotypical characters, garish makeup, costumes. Jewish jokes, words, expressions entered the American culture.
Snoo, what's snoo? Nothing. What's new with you?
And I remember sending away for tickets to see Eddie Cantor.
Mr. Olson, would you play something for Eddie? Do that, will you?
And all of a sudden, out of the wings comes this little guy with dark hair, black hair, little guy. He starts jumping around. Oh, potatoes are cheaper, tomatoes are cheaper now. And he was like a puppet.
Oh, the dumber they come, the better I like them. The dumber, the how they come.
To be known as a Jewish entertainer in the 1920s and 30s was severely limiting. Anti-Semitism was rampant. Israel Iskowitz became Eddie Cantor. Nathan Birnbaum, George Burns. Benny Kubelski, an Orthodox Jew, surfaced as Jack Benny. Fanny Brice overly exaggerated Yiddish accents, though in fact, she never learned or spoke Yiddish.
And the guy named Ahmed Hemmel, der knackt me off mein Kimmel, is out as much as funny, my dear.
As vaudeville in the 1930s expired, unable to compete with rising costs and the proliferation of motion picture houses, Jewish comedians struggled to seek an outlet for their developing talents. And then, breakthrough. Here, in the Catskill Mountains, specifically Sullivan and Ulster counties, families sought the pleasures of country life away from compressed city living and unhealthful conditions. They didn't have manual skills and barely spoke English. They frequently lacked money. But what they didn't lack was the courage and drive to succeed. Selig and Malky were typical. In 1914, after laboring in sweatshops for years, they somehow scraped together $450 and bought a broken-down Catskill farmhouse, grandly named Longbrook Farm. Out of necessity, they took in a boarder, then another. By the end of that first summer, they actually turned a profit of $81. Now, they were in the hospitality business. Their last name was Grossinger.
As every travel agent knows, a vacation means different things to different people.
Mr. Ellis, we're going on a vacation together, and we'd like you to help us. Someplace not too expensive. Yes.
I think I can fix you up at a place where you'll meet a few congenial young men. How would you like that?
Oh, that sounds good.
I see.
We're gonna hitchhike up to the Catskills. We know the highway, Route 17. We're gonna hitchhike up to the mountains, up to the finest resort we have seen. Oyster shake to the same on Bill Gates, holiday on Catskill
I vaguely remember the first trip that took at least 8 hours. We took a train.
She'll be coming around the Catskills when she comes. When she comes. She'll be coming around the Catskills when she comes. When she comes.
They added an engine to the train so it can get up to the hills. When you went through tunnels and everything, by the time you reached your destination, you were covered with soot.
Resorts were constructed by mostly Eastern European Jews. The bungalows, cottages, and hotel communities flourished, providing new, exciting, diverse venues. A new breeding ground, a kosher, fertile crescent, where Jewish-American comedy was nurtured.
I feel so good. I just got back from a pleasure trip. I took my mother-in-law to the airport.
Vaudeville was dying, burlesque was dying, and so these same people came into the Catskills and they started to create. They created the writing, they created the sketches.
We did a sketch, a comedy sketch, and then we wound up with a song and a dance. And they loved it. It was was very funny. You don't see that comedy anymore. Certainly not in these days.
I was about 15 years old and wanted to be an actor. And a man named Ernie Glucksman came down and said, we need somebody to throw the knife. There was an Apache act, a husband and wife, and they were beating the heck out of each other. At one point, they gave me the signal, and I threw a knife out. The man took the knife, and he stabbed this woman who was his wife, and the audience applauded. It was crazy. I got $5.
He got a crazy phobia. He thought he was a taxi cab. Well, I took him to a psychiatrist, and after 2 years, I went to the psychiatrist. Nothing was happening. I said, come here. I said, look, my friend is coming to you 2 years. He thinks it's a taxi cab. I said, are you going to cure him? The doctor said, what for? He takes me home every night.
The Catskills served as a training ground, not only for comics, but for American citizenship, evoking deep feelings of security long sought. The guests could be themselves in this land of hope, land of the free.
The Catskill Mountains had a tradition of Judaism about it because Gentiles almost never went there. They never heard of the place. Half of the Jews never even saw a Gentile. A Gentile was something that you saw in the movies. You went to the movies, you saw Gary Cooper, you said that was a Gentile. Jews never saw somebody 6 feet tall. There was no such thing as a 6-foot-tall Jew.
Gentiles. Hello, I'm a Gentile, and I walk straight as a stick. Did you ever see an old Jew? They're schlepping. Schlepping? Hi, I'm an old Jew. I'm 22, and I'm schlepping.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. All of our outdoor activities will be in full swing today. They'll be boating on Grosinger Lake, swimming at the pool, golf, tennis, handball, basketball, volleyball, and all other outdoor sports.
The Gentiles are running, playing basketball, volleyball, handball. They're running back and forth, and the Jews are saying, you see a piece of cake, kid?
Okay, well, let's go. Let's meet my...
As guest demands increased for leisure time choices, social directors became key figures, creating a myriad of activities day and night.
I am a very firm believer of exercise. I mean, that's how I stay firm, you know?
Once you were a social director, there was a set routine all over the Catskills. Tuesday would be champagne night. People would dance, and we would give them a bottle of champagne, which I don't know how expensive it was, but it said no deposit, no return on the bottle. Thursday was dramatic night. The actors were guilty of a felony, acting with intent to kill. And Sunday is introductory night. I would bring out the chef, the chambermaids, the guy who ran the rowboats, the maitre d'. The maitre d's going into a hospital to have his palm straightened out.
Some ordained clergymen even served as social directors.
Everybody.
I became a rabbi and I hated it. Supposed to be learning the Torah. Beautiful blonde would walk by, I'd lose my place, I forget what I'm talking about. I went to the Catskills and became a social director. So I'm there with about 100 people in a small hotel, and I would spend my whole day bothering them to play basketball. They're all Jews, they don't want to play basketball, they don't want to get off a chair. Then at night I would tell jokes, and I became a hit right away.
One person could love you, and another person can't stand you depending on his relationship to you. I want to show you an example. I have a girlfriend. To me, she's the most remarkable, the most wonderful person in the world. That's to me. But to my wife...
They had just a person who would be called a tumler, who would run around wildly and jump in the pool to get people laughing. That was how the entertainment started in the Catskills.
The Tumler was a porch clown who created tumult, excitement, anything to get a laugh. Amuse the guests, whatever it took. Physical comedy, impressions, mime. The kosher court jester. Get their attention and keep it.
They were doing Simon Says, they were doing games. They were dancing, singing, just to entertain the people who came to these small hotels when they started off. They were working 18 hours a day, so when they were always breaking in some kind of material.
David Daniel Kaminsky's show business debut came when he played a watermelon seed in an elementary school play. no doubt the oddest seat in the patch. At 13, he ran away from home. At 15, he was a combination busboy and comic on the Bourse circuit as part of the White Row Lake Hotel's social staff, working as a tumbler. The word was he was much too crazy. A tumbler too crazy? He must have been something. Danny Kaye was really something.
I think Danny Kaye deserves credit as the pioneer. Danny Kaye used to combine a number of cultures, Russian, Jewish, and American.
A roaring Russian huzzah, or very British Empire, or like the KGBianese, who already eats the cheese while he says no thank you please, be smart.
Danny Kaye is important because he made the jump from the Catskills to the big time.
It's the Danny Kaye Show.
And he showed that the training he got in the Catskills really paid dividends. I think he encouraged many people to follow.
Professor, as head of the organization, I should like to welcome you. Would you care for a cigar? Oh, thank you very much. There you go, buddy.
Sid Caesar the Great. His legions came not from Imperial Rome, but from the Coast Guard via Yonkers.
Oh, listen, my wife is a chain smoker.
Caesar, in an all-out campaign, conquered the audiences at the Avon Lodge and the heart of Florence Levy, the owner's daughter. The Avon Lodge is long since gone. However, Florence has been Sid's empress for over 60 years. Sid began as a saxophone player, just starting to turn his talents towards comedy.
Sid Caesar, back in 1938, played in our band. He was a very funny guy, I've been told.
He also used language, as Danny Kaye did, nonsense language. He could talk pidgin French.
Chantez, mesdames et messieurs, Gilles Poncer et Jean Red de Sepurel.
Pidgin Italian.
Mamma bisola capalate. E toppe l'orologio ne venare, tu non di navaccio la vai, e tonghi.
Pidgin German.
Das andere, wie von anderen Schliche von einer. Das macht lieber so, dass ihr das Mannequin ist geschmutzig. No, we didn't have any Japanese then, but it was Docho Yongji. You know, finger. And I like you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Al Murray, I guess.
My dad and my mom worked together in the Bourse circuit. They would get $30 for the club day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen,
and if they brought the kid, they got 5 more.
we present now those 2 stars.
So we were doing good at 35 a pop. When I wasn't well or I couldn't work, we lost $5. But I made it up to them. Now, have you ever see a kid of 6 in a tux? He's a winner before he goes on. I did the only song I knew at the time, which was Brother, Can You Spare a Time? It was perfect in the 1931s and 32s because of the Depression. My foot slipped and I broke one of the floodlights, which exploded. I really was frightened. My body movement made that audience laugh. And I heard the laugh, and I knew I'm in the right place. And I had spasms for days after that, knowing I don't want to sing, Brother, Can You Spare a Dime, Dad? I want to do what made those people laugh. He said, you can't develop a career on breaking a bulb. I said, but that's not it. We get rid of the bulb, find out what the visual something is that I can work. Because the laugh didn't come from the explosion, it came from how I reacted to it. And I have to find out how that works for everything else.
When I perform, and the reason I've continued to do it live for 55 years, is that there's a nutrition in it. And it's all improvised, out of the moment, because I'm listening to the audience and what they care about, the way they laugh and how often they laugh. And I haven't found another way to do it. You can't plan it. You can't write it out in a book.
Watching a man getting sustenance from a crowd and to deliver back to them a gift for that, which is laughter, is his aim in life.
To be in front of an audience and killing the people is a great, great feeling. You're the king. You're showing them the way to live, laughter. You're making them all happy. It's a fringe benefit.
Is it any wonder a comedian's lexicon includes such stock phrases as, I killed him, I bombed, I died last night? Heavy stakes indeed.
If you're good, you'll get the audience to believe they are doing what you're doing.
Women live longer than men. There's a reason for it. They're not married to women.
Turn that around. There was nothing worse than death for a comic.
I walked out at the Concord, and I was setting up a joke, and I said, Richard Nixon.
President Nixon is a Quaker, one of the most violent who's ever held the office.
And a bunch of retired policemen were in convention there, and they got up and started to boo me and sing God Bless America.
You're not killing them. They're killing you. And your mouth gets dry and your lips get heavy, and there's flop sweat, and you're dying. I died so badly that I think it took them a week to trace my body.
Comedians were not the only individuals that died. Reportedly, mobsters used Loch Sheldrake to dump their victims' bodies.
WEVD, New York, Brooklyn, the new Manischewitz American motto.
Brooklyn and the Bronx were the home for so many entertainers, guests, and hotel staff.
Growing up in Brooklyn was like no other world. Every time I think back on it, I look on it with greater fondness each time I think. It was a culture that was unique. Brooklyn was unique. I grew up in Bensonhurst from 1943 until I left to go down to Miami to break into broadcasting in 1957. I left Brooklyn, but Brooklyn didn't leave me.
I grew up in the Bronx, Decatur Avenue between 211th Street and Gun Hill Road on the 6th floor of an apartment building with 85 other families. It was a vertical existence. We never went out, we went down. We never returned, we went up. Maybe that's why I feel at home in an elevator. The hall smelled of pie baking in the afternoon and boiled chicken in the evening mixed with the scents of hundreds of people. There were the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Giants, stickball, Coney Island, the Grand Concourse. But for thousands of families, anticipating a trip to the mountains made them wish that summer was already here.
When it got hot in the summertime, there was no air conditioning. And most of the Jews, when it came out, couldn't afford it. The fire escape was the only vacation they could afford if they couldn't afford the Catskill Mountains.
Seemingly in the middle of nowhere, you'd come into this lush palace filled with your own kind of people, escaping the city in the summer heat.
When I first saw the Catskill Mountains and the hotels and the trees and the greens, it was quite impressive.
The heat wasn't up here. I'd see things that I really hardly ever saw in the city. The only time I'd see grass is the once or twice I was in Yankee Stadium.
In the Borscht Belt, in days gone by, where the Catskill Mountains kiss the sky.
It was the Borscht Belt, the sour cream Sierras, the right stuffing, the end of the Derma Road. The highest peak in the Jewish Alps was Grossinger's Hotel under the reign of Her Royal Highness Queen Jenny Grossinger. Tanya Grossinger grew up there.
In April of 1945, this 8-year-old kid started on a life adventure that at the time she would never have any idea where it would lead her. This was the most exciting thing in the world. Grossinger's had 850 acres, its own airport, 2 golf courses. a fully stocked lake with rowboats, 12 tennis courts, an outdoor Olympic swimming pool. It had an indoor swimming pool. At its heyday, catered to 1,100 guests and an almost equal number of staff. I walk into the dining room for the first time, and I can have anything I want. I saw men running around in uniforms, yelling, "Front!" all looking as if they didn't know where they were going.
There's an awful lot of kooks in this hotel.
The people that we know are not just the maitre d' or the bell clerk or the concierge person, but they're Tom and they're Lenny and they're Barry and they're, you know, it's people that you got to know. It's very friendly. It's what the Yiddishkeit calls the Hamish-stick feeling. It's very Hamish.
There's a feeling that you got in the Catskills that you never got anywhere else.
Women would wear dresses and fur stoles, men in suits and ties.
The Catskills was almost like the Champs-Élysées. It was like the French Riviera. To them, it was the ultimate vacation of all time. No Jew at that time ever went back to Europe because they just came from Europe. So no Jew would say, let's go to Europe for a vacation. That's where everybody got killed, and that's where everybody was escaping from. So they didn't think of going there. They just thought of thanking God I got out of there.
All year long they'd slave and slave and slave. For that 2 weeks holiday they'd save.
So now the Catskills became the haven for Jews in the summertime.
I learned that the first thing is you go over and say hello to the guests. The second thing is you try to feed them.
Oh, those great meals fit for a king, and they double order everything.
When Europeans, like my mother, came to America, food which had been so scarce in the old country became a kind of affirmation.
I mean, where'd you get 3 meals a day, plus whatever the people wanted to stuff in their handbags?
A guest would say, give me a little of this on the side.
Well, it was a good place to eat because you could eat 25 times a day.
Catskills specialized in lots of food. There was a great song Mickey Katz made once called Essen, which means eat. It's called Essen, Migay and Essen.
Essen, Migay
And everybody was eating and drinking, and they had tea rooms for 2 o'clock in the morning where Jews were still eating.
Migay and Essen.
Jews never finish eating.
Let me put a word in your vocabulary. Yogurt. How about this word? No, I couldn't eat more marble cake.
We're serving 3 meals a day, 7 days a week in a 110 Fahrenheit kitchen with alcohol and tattooed jerks behind the counter going, "Pick up, I kill you, you son of a bitch!" And they never learned your name, so they called you by what your order is. "French toast, pick up, getting cold, you son of a bitch! Hey, you too, potato pancake, I kick your ass too, eh?" Busboys lived for tips and developed mini-acts, routines to gain favor with the guests. They were the dining room entertainers.
I performed while I worked, and I was a good busboy. Trust me. And I made a ton of money as a busboy. And my Aunt Lil of Browns kept saying to me, "Don't tell the waiters. Jesus, don't tell them what you're making." "Well, Aunt Lil, I made $700 this week." "The waiters are making $150. Will you shut your hole?"
The kitchen staff lived in bunkhouses. Lenny Bruce and Buddy Hackett were busboys and roomed together. They later shared an apartment in New York.
They didn't have any furniture, so they had a one-room apartment that they went and bought sand and put it all in the apartment, and they invited broads over to the beach and put an umbrella and a bulb and sit there and smoke joints.
Most of the comedians that I knew began out there as bellhops. That included Buddy Hackett and Alan King and Red Buttons. Alan King was asked when he applied as a kid, "Are you a good dancer?" Because he had to dance with the women. That was his job.
And side together straight.
The staff was allowed to mingle with the guests. So all of the meeting of the sexes really took place on the dance floor, much more so than the pool, because you could snuggle up close on the dance floor.
And
Many times the owner would say, if so-and-so is not being danced with, go dance with her. We also were not allowed to dance with a person more than once.
People came up there for 3 reasons: food, relaxation, and entertainment. That was what they went there for. Now, there were a couple of other reasons that they don't really advertise, but there was 4.
The Catskills hotels were quite well known for their elaborate catered affairs. Romantic affairs were not so well publicized.
Sex, according to my mother, is a very fine department store on Fifth Avenue. The Bungalow Bunnies were available housewives, I'm not speaking from experience, who would engage in affection with younger men.
When I was 18, I worked as a busboy at the Fieldston Hotel. Available women, it was a kosher candy store for other guys. Unfortunately, not for me.
First summer out of high school in 1948, I was a busboy. My first sexual experience was at the baseball field, and was with a woman, a married woman, because her husband would come up on weekends. We made love at home plate. As I like to tell people, I scored. And the tough part I had was when her husband came up. We only did it once. When her husband came up on the weekend, I was so nervous that he knew something from the way she looked at me. I was served the soup, and I was like this with the ladle of soup. And when I had to give him his soup, all over him, I had to apologize, and I was scared to death. And I remember once the head of the kitchen saying, "Label, you'll never amount to anything." And my suggestion label is, do not go into the food business. That was a wise suggestion.
If a girl was single, she would go to the mountains for her Romeo. How her ma would wail and cry if she didn't get a guy in the Borscht Belt in the days gone by.
The single scene became a major part of the Catskills clientele. Lots of girls were looking for husbands.
I did meet my future wife at Arrowhead Lodge in the Catskills. But other than that, I didn't have many conquests.
My wife can tell you, we learned how to dance here. We learned how to live here. We had wonderful experience. Many babies were born here in these Catskill Mountains through our courtships and relationships.
I met my wife at high school. Finally met her. I met my Miss Wright. I didn't know her first name was Always, but still, we're very happy.
This is the news that electrified the world. Unconditional surrender.
When the post-war era started and things began to change all over the country, economically, politically, demographically, the Catskills changed with them, and with that change came the change in comedy.
The era of the social staffs was over. Modern stand-up comedy was born.
I said to my wife, "Where do you want to go for your anniversary?" She said, "I want to go somewhere I've never been before." I said, "Try the kitchen."
The comedians would often, shall we say, borrow material. Most times they'd forget to mention it.
My brother Mo and I would go to the famous Palace Theater, and all of the well-known comedians of that time would be billed at the Palace, and we would sit in the balcony and make notes of the jokes. Then I would pass the jokes around the following summer in the Catskills.
They would sometimes see comics over and over again, and sometimes the same comics over and over again. And when they got to the punchlines, the guests would speak en masse and repeat the punchlines with the comics. So they already heard it. And I said, I'll tell you what, though. I will make notes on every comics routine from the previous week. And then when you come, you'll give me a little thank you, and I'll tell you what their routines were. So you make sure that you don't repeat it in your show. And that's what I did, and that's what they did.
After the main show, there was a show in the Night Owl Lounge at the Concord. So there was a show after the show.
I remember the first time a big star was Jerry Lewis. We were here and we enjoyed him. We were friends of his parents, and we enjoyed the entertainment most of the time.
The audiences in the Catskill Mountains were seeing a performer on a Wednesday night that they didn't have to pay to see, that came on the dinner. They just watched and they like it. It's a nice man with a dog, gave him a pretzel. Nice. Good. Harold, did you see the man with the dog? Gave him a pretzel? Why don't you do that, Harold?
You know where I first saw you? I didn't like you. My wife, she's not that crazy about you either. But you give me your autograph anyway.
The greatest pleasure a Jew has is to tell you which show stunk. You think he stunk? I saw a show that really stunk. You walked out. I didn't even go in. I didn't even go.
They were the toughest audiences in the world. You had to bang them, or they walked.
If you want to speak about comedians, I think they started from here, they went to Hollywood, to Las Vegas, to Atlantic City.
After World War II, stand-up comedians were booked through agents and showcased in Sunday night venues. A seminal opportunity to be discovered.
I mean, in my house, I can't relax. The other night, I told my kid, I said, someday you'll have children of your own. He said, so will you.
Charlie Rapp was a man who really was the agent of the Catskills, the king of the Catskills.
2 nights, 5 shows.
Charlie saw us at Ann Mira, my wife, and I. They booked us at the Catskills. Our agent at the time said, you know, these audiences are going to love you.
5 shows each night. A break. Sure. You're also the waiter.
My Uncle Charlie would go out and find acts, even if they were bad acts. He didn't care if they worked or didn't work. He would pay them just to drive 3 or 4 acts up to the mountains.
You're picking up the bird act, the ventriloquist, and the magician. They need a ride.
And usually if you had a car, you were the first one booked because very few had a car.
What do you mean you sold your car? Who needs you? Forget it.
Talent was important, but a car was more important.
On the way home, you stopped at the Red Apple Inn, where all the acts got together. You'd have a cup of coffee, and people would brag about how many shows they did. Oh, I killed them in this place. I did great in this one.
I got $200 a show to play the Concord.
Gone was the traditional set-up, payoff style, old-world humor, joke-telling. Innovative acts incorporated characters, social commentary, stream-of-consciousness delivery, taking risks. The act was about them.
I'll tell you my trouble. I got the wrong doctor. You know my doctor, Dr. Vinny Boombach. Know my doctor? What a doctor. Oh, I called him last week. I told him, Doc, I swallowed a bottle of sleeping pills. He told me to have a few drinks and get some rest.
Man gets on a train. New York to Chicago. Pullman car. 11-hour trip. He's ready to get nestled into his bed. The next passenger comes in, it's a woman. He gets in the upper berth, she gets in the lower berth, and the train starts for Chicago. Now, you don't know where this is going. He leans over and says to her, I'm a little chilled. Can I borrow a blanket? She says, you know, we've never met before. We're strangers on a train, and we'll never meet again. This is the only time we're going to know each other, these 11 hours. Why don't we play man and wife? He says, fine. She says, good, get your own goddamn blanket. Now, that's funny. It's man and wife funny. It's surprise funny. It's take you this way, go that way.
So what does make people laugh?
I mean, that's the story of my life. No respect. I don't got no respect at all.
Don't be a hockey puck.
Take my wife, please.
According to that noted comedy analyst, Dr. Milton Berle, when asked what makes people laugh, profoundly replied,
Funny is funny.
I went to a psychiatrist and I said to him, "What is it?" He said, "It's $25 a visit." I said, "For $25, I don't visit. I move in."
When you have a comic who is funny, just funny, we call him Bones. That means it's in his bones.
If you're a funny guy, you're a funny guy.
A story is most important. I don't care if it's a 5-minute sketch.
And they get the greatest composer there is. They get Beethoven. Now you call up his agent. You call up Beethoven's agent.
Gotta have a beginning.
Beethoven is dead. Beethoven? Dead?
Gotta have a middle.
All right, you can't get Beethoven. Call up Mozart. You get Mozart, call his agent. You get a side of agent.
Professor, Mozart is dead.
Wolfgang gone?
Gotta have an end.
All right, I'll tell you what you do. You get Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky is dead. That's where I got you, Spunky. I just made that name up. There is no such thing.
Jack, something has got to be done about your being so cheap.
A tag, a hook, is a characteristic that audiences could use to define a comedian's persona.
Your money or your life?
For example, Jack Benny, his frugality.
I said your money or your life. I'm thinking it over.
Don Rickles' tag is his abrasiveness.
Clint, I say it, nobody else has said it, and I say it from my heart. You're a lousy actor.
Milton Berle's stealing material.
This year I'm going to take it easy. I'm going to take it easy. I really mean that. If I hear a good joke, I'm going to take it, and for me, that's easy.
Berle called Henny Youngman the king of bad gags, not the king of Baghdad.
My wife hates housework. I bought electric iron, electric dishwasher, electric dryer. She said too many gadgets around, she had no place to sit down. What did I do? Bought an electric chair.
He began in the Catskills as a fiddler. His violin playing was so bad, he decided to become a comedian and make people laugh. And he would say things like, "I haven't spoken to my wife in 3 weeks. I don't want to interrupt her."
I mean, it's not easy being me. When I was born, the doctor told my mother I did all I could, but he pulled through anyway.
Rodney Dangerfield told me when he was a kid, his parents took him to Coney Island, and he got separated from his parents. He said to the policeman, "You think I'll ever find my parents?" The policeman said, "I don't know. There's so many places they could hide."
If I wasn't a Jew, I would be a Catholic. They got the world by the balls. They do whatever they want, then they confess they didn't do it. What if you go to confess to the rabbi? Rabbi, I want to confess. Go to the police station. Rabbi, I had an affair. Who catered it? How many people?
Buddy Hackett's brash style, I can follow anyone attitude, made him a standout.
I worked with him for 10 years as his opening act. He taught me everything I know about comedy. To go inside the joke, to always pull more out of it, to take your time, to have a pacing, to know that there was so much there. Don't rush and don't press. He taught me everything. He was my best friend.
Exactly what is a comedian? Wikipedia, funny name for an encyclopedia, but hey, it's free. Wikipedia defines a comedian as a performer who entertains an audience by making them laugh. Someone who doesn't make an audience laugh is defined as out of work.
Psychologists discovered most comedians are generally very smart and had psychotherapy. Aristotle would not be surprised. Thousands of years ago, he wrote, probably referring to those Parthenon stand-ups, "Melancholy men are the most witty."
But it turns out in New York State, they have a very funny law that says you can't get a divorce unless you can prove adultery. And that's very strange because the Ten Commandments say, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." But New York State says you have to. So I figured one of us has got to commit adultery to get the divorce. I volunteered for it.
Well,
Stay tuned.
ABC television.
Edward R. Murrow once chidingly referred to television as wires in a box. Yet, simply put, those wires in a box change the way Americans live.
Okay, Sarge. You've been asking for it. Now you're gonna get it.
We were on the cusp of this new development that we can go into someone's house and spend the evening with them and give them pleasure through laughter.
Everything was done the right way. I don't know these people at all. Is your dollar?
If you could speak to millions, why would you speak to hundreds?
Thank you very much. Here's one for you.
The Catskills, they had no chance to compete against television.
Why go out to a club, let alone a resort? We have it all at home, and it's free. And, honey, heat up my TV dinner.
There's a lucky buck. I'll keep that myself.
The golden era of Catskill comedy was coming to an end.
Hear now the news. In the Catskill Mountains, over 400,000 people gathered for the Woodstock Music Festival.
America's core values were under fire. A counterculture revolution that spawned massive change, including what we found funny.
Nixon is the kind of a guy who, if you were drowning 20 feet from shore, would throw you a 15-foot rope. And then Kissinger would go on television and would say that the president had met you more than halfway.
Comedians are the thermometer that takes the temperature of the culture. They can tell you where we are at any given moment. If we look at the comedians, we are looking at ourselves.
The audiences in the 50s, and especially the 60s, was ripe. They had detected they'd been lied to in Vietnam. They were informed. They were also being drafted. In other words, we discovered the audience.
The charge is Richard Nixon is running for governor of California, and I realize sometimes the shows are taped ahead. I want this material to be topical, and he'll be running for something no matter when the show is on, so sorry.
It's an offer to the audience to participate in a cerebral fashion.
He's running for governor, and he said that he wants to do something about narcotics. There's a headline on the Western Edition New York Times which said, quote, it said, want to stop dope running in state.
The tradition that I came to work in was established by Mark Twain and handed to Will Rogers and eventually to Bob Hope. Topical humor.
We've been invited to do another command performance at the Palace again, and I think it's wonderful. This is the 4th time the King has invited us. He keeps hoping we'll bring back the towels.
I have a dream today.
In the latter 50s and early 60s, part of the comedy was very much related to racial equality. And it was really just a connection to the whole contemporary scene that Playboy was trying to reflect. Humor was always important to the magazine. There were more changes taking place on the nightclub stage. It included black people and white people.
And here he is, Dick Gregory.
When I started off, a black person comedy was not permitted to work white nightclubs. You could sing and you could dance, but you couldn't stand flat-footed and talk to white folk. Nowhere. All this black comic that white folks are seeing now, you wouldn't have seen it had it not been for Hugh Hefner.
Are you a good audience tonight? And treat me nice, because with President Kennedy's new housing bill, I might be your neighbor now.
We didn't go out doing mom and pop jokes.
The reason we lost our...
And Lenny Bruce was like one of the wonders.
Because you start to look about the God and say, well, what does he look like? The Christian God has a family, a mother, a father, and he's been in 3 pictures. My God, I look for him, and he's never been in any films.
It should be pointed out that Lenny Bruce started in the Catskills, that he wanted to be a lawyer.
You had constant reminders of your God. He's on crucifixes. The Jewish God is nailed in a little box next to the door, mezuzah. An old Jew is always kissing him and going, where's God? We painted over him. Get inside the house.
The kind of social issues and political concerns raised by that triad, Dick Gregory, Mort Sahl, and Lenny Bruce, did not appeal to either Catskill attendees or Catskill comedians.
A lot of the hotels didn't survive because they didn't have what the public wanted as the years went by.
And RCA air conditioners are backed by the research and engineering skill of RCA.
You could now go to London and to Puerto Rico and to the French Riviera. One of the attractions of Grossingers in many of the hotels in the Catskills was the daughter could meet a nice Jewish boy, the son could meet a nice Jewish girl. Well, the daughters and the sons didn't want to travel with families anymore.
Now, many former guests could afford homes with pools, join country clubs, send their children to summer camps. Even the legendary Catskill menu changed. 7 choices of herring for breakfast were replaced by granola.
When I got married, we had 456 hotels. That's a long time ago. And now you've got a Tokenuts.
It was a very sad picture. It was a very sad moment for people who worked in the Catskills. In fact, at the Concord, I told people, I came on, I was a comedian. I walked off, guy said, congratulations, you're a partner. They went bankrupt in the middle of my act.
The Borscht Belt season was Memorial Day to Labor Day, late May to early September. Hotels would shut down and prepare for the winter. Guests would go home. This time, most would not be coming back.
The Catskill legacy is evident in almost every contemporary comedian.
It's kind of like a blessing and a burden at the same time. It's like, because I feel like to have this foundation is a really rare, it's like a gift. There's an intimacy I've inherited. My brother has too. There's a vulnerability in his work.
You had no choice, in a way. This stuff rubbed off on you, or you came to your way, because you were always in the stroller while Ann and I were working and rehearsing material in the playground.
Today, comedy clubs provide developing comedians the opportunities to hone their skills.
You know who cares less about your life and your problems than you do? Everybody.
My HMO, they charged me for a self-breast exam. It's a flat fee.
I got to hear the voices of the other comedians, and that informed my comedy.
I think I'm on the computer a little too much. The other night I was in bed with my husband. I said, hey, could you scroll down?
Being a comedian is up there even as high as a doctor, because in theory, you are providing pleasure and relief from one's problems.
If you're a Jew and you marry a Jew, that means everything you hated about going home is now in your house.
That Borscht Belt thing resonates through all areas of comedy, you know, black, white, any ethnicity. It created the language and the timing of modern comedy.
So, what about the Catskills today? Crazy Tyrone, the resident Kutcher's Tumbler, is the last of the breed.
I will go on making people laugh. I'll bring my art of tumbling wherever I go. It's in my heart. And it's a perfect environment here at the Kutcher's Hotel to do so.
I've had more fun than anybody in the world.
Look at this. Look at this. I had more hair this morning. I can't believe what happened in one day.
Ladies and gentlemen, please say hello to Dick Capri.
People that know what they want. This table of Jewish women in a restaurant, and the maitre d' comes over and says, is anything all right?
We started in 1907. Because they say, well, you were here all the time. A few years I was away. I enjoy when I go out to check in or greet people. They didn't feel like they were coming to a hotel. It was like coming to a family. Just ask anyone. Oh, I've been coming 30 years, 40 years. They're proud to say that because they had so many good years here. You go back to places you were happy and saw your children grow up. They now bring their children and their grandchildren. I love the Catskills. No, I don't expect to leave.
The Catskills were an enormously important historical moment, but I think we'd miss their value if we think of them as just history. They continue resonating with us today.
They created the path down the road to make it possible for these guys to stand up on a stage and make you laugh.
This is your story, Al Duncy. This is going to be the story of your life. We're going to tell the intimate, inside story.
To make people laugh is the biggest thing that you can do. It helps you get through life. How are you going to get through it? Make a little fun of it.
Yes, sir, Al Duncy. This is a night you will long remember because...
The Catskills helped me in my comedy, it helped me in my real life, and it helped me in my love life. It made my life. It truly did.
It gives me a little twang in the heart to hear about where it all began and where we all learned from. I have to call on the kid in me. Why would we want to get old? But it's okay as long as you don't have to give up young.
On behalf of all the comics of today, the comics of yesterday, the comics of tomorrow, don't stop laughing. Keep on laughing.
Don't you love farce? My fault, I fear. I thought that you'd want what I want. Sorry, my dear. But where are the clowns? There ought to be clowns. Quick, send in the clowns.
The way the world is today, we should always be asking, where are the clowns? Rest easy, Mr. Sondheim, as long as laughter continues to reflect and illuminate what fools we mortals be. The clowns will always be here. They've just changed as we've changed. The best of them offering the sweet respite of comfort. You see, the clowns never really left.
Don't bother there. Make 'em laugh, make 'em laugh. Don't you know everyone wants to laugh? Your dad said, be an actor, my son, but be a comical one. They'll be standing in lines for those old honky-tonk monkey shines. Now you could study Shakespeare and be quite elite, and you can charm the critics and have nothing to eat. Just slip on a banana peel, the world at your feet. Make 'em laugh, make 'em laugh, make 'em laugh, make 'em laugh, make 'em laugh. Don't you know everyone wants to laugh? Your grandpa said go out and tell him a joke, but give it plenty of hope.
Good shape.
Joe
Franklin, take one marker.
You start off by pretending you're a dancer with grace.
When Bush said he sees a light at the end of the tunnel in Iraq, it was a perfect opportunity to say, that's a train coming the other way.
It was an incredible... I hope it's one of ours. Get him!
Mr. Backus.
Professor Backwards.
Professor Backwards came on the stage and he wrote everything backwards. Today they were saying a guy's sick. Take him away. He can't write straight.
You know, he died in a fire and he was yelling, "Pell, Pell."
They made me do this, folks. What? Oh, potatoes and fever, potatoes and fever, fall in love.
You gotta be good. You gotta be funny.
This woman goes to a palm reader to have her palm read. The palm reader says, "Your husband will die a violent death." The woman says, "Will I be acquitted?"
The first thing that goes when you get to be 80 are these. So I would appreciate it. I will not consider you unkind and that you're yelling at me, but I would like to hear you.
That kind of segues into my next question.
Why are you yelling? We're sitting here.
I don't know.
The only thing I'd like to add is that I never worked so cheap in my life. And I'm happy I got the opportunity to express myself, because to hear my own voice is my only pleasure in life.